Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, based on where you are. My name is Shruti Shivdasan. I am the chair of SUT Plus Aberdeen branch. And as I've seen a lot of new names and people from all over the world, I'll give you a quick introduction to SUT. So the SUT stands for the Society for Underwater Technology. We are a multidisciplinary learned society. We bring together organizations and individuals who are passionate about underwater technology, ocean science, and offshore engineering. Like I mentioned, I'm part of the SUT Plus. So that is the subset of SUT for young professionals. We cater to students, recent graduates, and professionals who have a few years experience in this sector. We were founded in 1966 and we have branches all over the world. So you'll be seeing quite a few pins around the world, and you might be pleasantly surprised to find a branch near where you reside or work. Please check our website and you'll find some interesting events in your local area as well. How do you get in touch with us? So there's multiple ways that you can get in touch with us. You can check out our website, that is www.sut.org. There you get all the news about us, the different events that the different branches are organizing. Our LinkedIn page, we post there regularly. So any updates, most of the up-to-date information will be posted on there. And if you have any questions about this webinar or any of the activities we organize, please send us an email at sutplus@sut.org. If you are interested in underwater technology and the related subjects, please check out our YouTube channel. The channel name is SUT Media. Here you will find recordings of all our previous free webinars. Some of the interesting topics would be hydrogen, offshore wind energy, decommissioning, just to name a few. If you are interested in being a member, you can email our membership and finance officer, Jane Hinton, at jane.hinton@sut.org for more details about membership. It's great because it gives you discounts on publications, different training courses that we organize. And last slide from me before we start. This presentation is being recorded. So only the presentation bit will be recorded, and that is it from me. I will hand over to Sara and let her give you all a short introduction about herself and tell us more about floating solar technology.
I hope you guys can hear me loud and clear. And thank you so much, first of all, for the invitation. And it's going to be a pleasure to be here with you, sharing with you thoughts and with regards to floating solar. So a few words about myself. I have nearly a decade of experience. I've been working in Equinor. It's a Norwegian energy company. I started as a subsea engineer. I work with subsea technology for nearly 5 years. And then I moved and started work with renewable energy. More on the research and technology side of it. So I worked with solar, floating solar, and then wave energy. And then more recently, now I'm working under the project development for offshore wind. So I think I have a bit of a miscellaneous background. So I guess that at least gives you guys some so it is possible to start in the oil and gas and then start to move and shape your career a bit more towards the renewables. So if you can go to the next slide, that will be super. Yeah, what I'm going to present to you today, it's a summary of a paper that was published last year. It's a co-authoring between me and a colleague of mine, and the paper aims, of course, to provide the context for the floating PV sector and more in detail to understand what is the impact of using the simulation tools for energy production. And further down in the slides, I will go deep into what this means, but I think that also makes sense to you. Um, just also to explain to you and also kind of show you the storyline and an overview of what is floating solar, in what the technology consists, when did it emerge, what was the drivers, what is the technology landscape, what are the challenges of the technology, of course, and then I will go into the case studies and deep dive a bit more into the impact of this simulation tools that has on the energy production. And then, of course, I have one last slide where I aim to show to you what is probably the next step for floating solar. Of course, here, if you are more interested in finding more details and read the paper, you have here a snip on how you can find it. So just good readings if you guys are interested. So if you can go to the next one, that'll be great. Yeah, so I think this is like a very introductory slide, and I'm pretty sure we all here are very aware of the global energy transition, and that we see a continuously rising in energy demand, and we also see that there is a huge need in decoupling the energy use from its emissions. So it's of course that the energy demand worldwide is going to increase exponentially, and we see that there is a strong focus on the governments on and coming up with stricter climate policies, for instance, the Paris Agreement. So there is really a focus, and that focus has led to this unprecedented growth in renewable energy. And of course, the growth, the decreasing costs, and the rising investments, and all these learning curves um, have enabled the technology, and when I say the technology, I'm talking about renewable energy in general, to reach nowadays grid parity. So that's possible to see, and of course, as you can see from the graph, fossil fuels, they still represent a lion's share in the worldwide energy supply, but we really see this trend of renewables coming in, and they are great play that they have to do in the upcoming years. So if we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so before we jumping in floating solar, I think it makes sense just to give you a quick overview on the solar PV itself, because it's somehow, if we understand that market and why is it such an attractive renewable energy source, then we understand the jump and the need for the floating energy. So the solar PV sector is quite well established sector. It has consistent growth so far, and we have seen a tremendous decrease in the cost reductions and in the recent developments. So it's possible to find applications of solar PV technology in various types. For instance, in your rooftops, you can have just the PV modules there installed, but you also can have now, for instance, tiles and that have the PV cells incorporated in that. So that's called, for instance, built integrated PV. You also have the more commonly type of solar parks, where you have your PV modules installed on top of ground-mounted structures. And of course, for instance, since we all have a background from the subsea technology, it's possible, for instance, to find the solar PV panels in buoys and signaling buoys in the ocean. The sector itself, as you can see from the middle of the slide, has grew tremendously in the past 10 years. So we can say that the solar sector has started, as a niche, a market that has exploded in the recent years, where we see a lot of projects and huge projects being installed everywhere. And of course, I think it's important kind of to show to you on the graph on the right hand side that the solar technologies, they have quite competitive levelized costs of energy. If, for instance, we are comparing them with coal, nuclear, or even natural gas. So it's a technology that is profitable, so to speak. So if we go to the next slide, then we start to understand, like everything in life, the ground-mounted PV technology has challenges, and those challenges, they were the main drivers for the emergence of floating PV, especially in certain markets. Of course, that the solar technologies, they are key for the energy transition, but these challenges, they will limit the project development. And of course, the most important challenge that is kind of for nowadays seen for the ground mounted type of technology is that, you know, the easy sites, they have already been used. So now we are moving to harder sites, the more difficult topography, and of course that has an impact on the cost of the project. If we are in locations, let's say Asia, where there is a lot of competition for land, shall we use the land for installing solar PV? Shall we use land for agriculture? That's just one example. That, of course, increases the cost of land, and also, of course, increases the capex of the project. And of course, once again, the good sites, they have been used. So nowadays we are moving from areas close to the consumer. So then that will require also more higher costs with regards to infrastructures, and also with regards to grid. But so that's these topics, especially mostly connected with a lack of available space in a lot of regions, they were the big motivation for the emergence of floating solar. There is also another aspect, which is a bit the paradox, like I used to call it, of the solar technology. So if we have one solar panel, it produces energy from the sun, but then at the same time, the efficiency of the PV panel decreases with the increase in temperature. So it is believed also that moving the PV panels to applications next to the water will then decrease the temperature of the PV model, and hence increase the production. But I will touch on this as far as we move into the presentation. But of course, here on the right hand side is just a graph that shows to you how the market has been evolved. It really started with really small applications, and now we are on a gigawatt scale. There's a lot of projects everywhere in the world, but of course, so far, or at least until 2020, China was the largest market for floating PV, and also with the highest installed capacity globally. So if you can go to the next slide.
Just to speak up quickly, Sarah, you got a quick question there. So it's from Andrew Smith saying, I just assisted a flexible solar film business, Power Roll Secure Funding. That is a good addition to the range of solar solutions. Do you think flexible film solar has a role to play?
I honestly believe so, but of course there's we probably may have challenges with efficiencies with regards to the technology, but I definitely believe that we will have a role both on the ground mounted technology, so to speak, but for floating solar, I think it could be a very interesting application. No worries. So I guess we can go to the next one. Yeah, so this slide is basically just to give you an overview of where or actually what are the most, where in the world it's possible to see more floating solar projects installed. And just to give you you know, just for you to picture you know, a bit the pipeline and how it is envisaged that we will see a steady growth of the sector in the upcoming years. So I guess if we can move to the next slides, that'll be great. This starts, I guess, being a bit more interesting because I'm starting to deep dive on the technology. So floating solar, it's not a very, it is somehow and not at the same time very complex technology. It basically consists of floating of a floating structure where you put on top your PV modules, and of course you need to have mooring lines and anchors to secure this floating structure to the seabed, and of course we need to have the underwater cables to bring the electricity to shore. The floating PV applications, as you are going to see in the next slides, I like to split them in several segments, but the market has emerged with applications in the what we call the freshwater type of bodies. So that's like, for instance, drinking water reservoirs, reservoirs from hydroelectric dams, industrial water ponds, and so on and so forth. And the type of technology that we see there, it's totally different from the technology that we are seeing that is currently being developing for instance, marine applications of the technology. But we will see this as I go through the presentation. If you can go to the next one, Sutri, that'll be excellent. Yeah, I'm not going to bother you a lot with the benefits of floating solar, because I think that somehow by explaining to you the most common or the biggest challenges for the ground mounted, that they were the drivers for the floating solar. So of course that we don't need to use land, we are using water bodies, so the competition for land and all the costs involved with that, it's somehow erased. And of course at the same time, from an environmental perspective, it is expected, because this is still under research, but it is expected that these floating structures, they will have a positive effect, and they will contribute to the reduction of the algae growth and improvement of the water quality where we place them. And it is also expected that by having a floating structure on top of a lake, that will reduce the evaporation of that water body. But of course, on the energy production, it has been highlighted among the literature so far that one of the biggest benefits is this increase in production, like I have explained previously, due to the cooling effect by having the PV modules next to the water. Previously, or on the early stage of the floating solar, there was some claims that this increase in production could be up to 10%. But recent studies, of course, they are pinpointing different numbers for this increase in production, and they are showing also that the increase in production is extremely dependent on the type of the technology that it is used. And I will pinpoint that to you in the upcoming slides. So if you can go to the next one. this is a very hot topic nowadays with regards to floating solar. I don't want to spend a lot of time deep diving into it, but there is a strong focus about either co-locating or hybridization of hydroelectric plants. So there's several projects in the world. For instance, in Portugal, they are going to build a a floating solar PV system in water reservoir from a dam, where and the idea it's twofold. Either you can use the floating solar plant as another source of energy, and then you inject that energy to your grid, and that's basically co-location. You have two different sources, but then you can try to go into a model of hybridization. So you will be somehow using, or you'll be supporting the daytime peak load for the evening peak. So you will be somehow optimizing the day and night power generation, and somehow you could use the reservoir as a giant battery. This is also done in some countries, for instance, with onshore wind, and by using floating PV in some countries installed on top of these reservoirs from hydroelectric plants. It is also another advantage because in some countries like Brazil, we have the dry seasons that also typically correspond to the high solar irradiation months. And so then by having both, we can reduce the seasonal variability of energy. So if we can go to the next slide.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi. Just saw a question pop up, so I thought we asked that. So it's from Chengi, asking the applications you outlined seem to be inshore, and would it be correct to assume that the floating PV systems are not suitable for offshore locations?
Oh, we are going to see that in the next slide. So if you can bear with me for a second, you will see that.
Yeah, I'll move on to the next.
Yeah, so this one here, it's a very busy slide, and goes a bit. It will touch somehow a bit on the question that was just asked. There's challenges connected to the technology, and so far I've been trying to present to you more the freshwater type of applications, and unfortunately the sector has already foreseen some incidents. For instance, in Japan, there was a quite a serious one, but this is all learnings for the sector, and we see now the project development being done in a much more robust way. So there's several challenges with regards to floating solar. For instance, warranty of the PV modules. If we have applications in salt water, these can lead to premium costs. And of course, like I've been trying to pinpoint to you, a lot of the environmental impacts of these floating solar structures, they are still poorly documented. So there's a lot of research ongoing, and of course there's also, from a technical perspective, there's very interesting challenges with regards to lifetime and reliability of the structures. The structures itself will have things moving under the constant movements of the waves, how that would affect or lead to the fatigue of the structures. We'll be talking about corrosion of the structures, or the floating structures, but also potential corrosion or accelerated degradation of the PV modules. So then we'll have marine growth as well. So there's a lot of challenges that are being addressed among the sector. And for instance, there's a very interesting topic also, that the movement of the waves, because even though if we are in a lake, if we have the effect of the fetch, and if we have a very large lake, we are going to have waves. So there's still the question ongoing, how can this constant movement of the waves affect the PV module, because that's a rigid structure? Can that lead to loads that are going to create a micro cracking on these PV panels, and hence decrease the production of them? So we are looking at still a young sector with a great potential, but with still some challenges that need to be sorted. And I can pinpoint to you one interesting aspect is that recently in the beginning of this year, the first recommended practice was from the NVGL was published. So that signals that the floating solar sector is getting more attention from different stakeholders around the world, and it's getting a more serious attention. So if we can go to the next slide. Yes, I think I've mentioned this to you before, that I see how I see the floating PV market. I see it's in this four categories. And a bit answering to the previous question, yes, we see current applications in freshwater bodies, in small lakes, now in bigger lakes, where we start to see a higher impact of the waves, but we are also seeing technology development for the marine environment. I like it to call it marine environment, neither near shore or offshore, because I think that the way that the market is going to evolve, it's going to be quite on a natural step. Of course, it makes sense that the technology is going first to be deployed more close to the coastline, for instance, in harbor ports. And we see research ongoing nowadays, and we see pilot testing. But at the same time, we can expect that the technology will be developed to be applicable in more harsher conditions in the ocean. And there's already technologies under demonstration stage being developed for that end. So the next two slides I will actually show to you. Yeah, if we can go to the next one. Yeah, so I can just show to you some examples of the technologies. There's a bit of a lack of technology convergence, a bit with regards to floating structure, as you can see from these slides. Each type of the structure has its benefits, its drawbacks. I'm not going to go into details into those. I just would like to pinpoint to you that the most commonly used floating technology so far in freshwater applications is the individual float type, the one on your left-hand side of the screen. Yes, that one, the HDPE type of structure, but we also have other different type of structures, like the one on the opposite side, the membranes type of technology. And the reason I'm pinpointing these two technologies, it's also because of what I've mentioned to you earlier on the cooling effect. So if you look at this type of membrane technology, you see that the membrane is in direct contact with water, and then we have the PV panels on top. And here, the cooling effect and the increase in production is much more pronounced than in the HDPE type of technology, because we have a somehow closed structure, the plastic pontoon, where we put the PV module on top. So we have some increase in production, but it's not that high as in this type of membrane technology. So if we move to the next slide,
Okay, just quickly, we've got another question there, again from Andrew Smith. So just saying, how much work is being done around anchoring floating solar in oceans or large lakes? Are micropiling solutions better for the environment being considered?
I think that's the anchoring. It's very much dependent on the project where you are. So you can see a lot of different solutions being deployed, but from more kind of a conventional type of anchors to basically concrete blocks to piles. It really depends on the project. I hope I answered your question. Great. So this slide here to you is just to show to you so you guys can visualize a bit the floating PV biggest projects so far installed or recently installed. And if we can go to the next slide. Yes, it's going back a bit to the marine applications of floating solar. There's a lot of focus on research going on simply because the common type of floating structures that are used in the freshwater type of waters, they are not suitable to be applied in the marine locations because these type of structures they will be facing heavy loads that will compromise the reliability, and these systems were not developed for that. So we see that there is a strong focus among the research community in developing new concepts instead of scaling up the existing technologies, and of course it's imperative, you know, to try to find a balance between a system that is able to withstand the cyclic loads of the environments and at the same time survive to the extreme conditions that we see on the ocean, and that is paramount for a multi-megawatt project. So if we can go probably to the next slide, but I see that probably there are some questions popping up, right?
Yes, you've got one seems more like a comment. So you've got Bruce there saying Ocean Flow International have provided mooring calculations for ocean-based floating PV array. And then a question below that from James. So what are the dimensions of the largest systems installed to date?
To date, okay. So for freshwater applications, so far it's 150 megawatt peak capacity installed in China. And with applications on the marine environment, we have in Singapore 5 megawatt installed farm very recently, and of course, but we have more research development ongoing, and there is a consortium or a collaboration between Equinor and and Moss Maritime, which is a company that belongs to Saipem, and they are aiming to test one of the first floating solar plants that are going to be deployed in harsh environments here in Norway. So it's going to be very exciting to see that. So I think there are more questions popping up.
Yeah, just a further comment from James there saying, apologies, I meant physical dimensions rather than the power output.
Oh, physical dimensions. Okay, that's a fair question, and I don't have a good answer for that. But I guess I can pinpoint to you that the footprint of solar is quite big, and the same goes for floating solar. So if you can imagine that a PV module has nearly a dimensions of 2 by 1 meters, and if you can aim for a PV module that has a 400 kilowatt peak capacity. So you can easily calculate how many PV modules that you need for 150 megawatt capacity. And then by then you have roughly a dimension of how big, and it is huge, the footprint of this technology can be. I know it was not a very straight answer, but at least it gives you some homework to check that. If we can go to the next slide. Yeah, just a few words on the economy of the sector. So it's still a young technology, and of course the LCOEs, or the levelized cost of energy, are still a bit on the higher end when we compare to other renewable energy sources. But I think it's a matter of we starting to see the learning curve starting to kick in, and we see further cost reductions coming in. So if we can go to the next slide. I think I will somehow just skip this one, but just basically to pinpoint to you guys that some of the existing technology for the ground-mounted solar applications, and by that I'm talking about the modules itself and the inverters that are commonly used on land-based, they can be easily used for the floating applications on freshwater bodies. We just may need slightly improvements, for instance, on IP ingression, but that is already out of the shelf technology. So if we can go to the next slide. Yes, so here it's a bit the motivation, the objective of the paper, right? So besides of kind of explaining to you the all the emergence and what led to floating solar, the paper also aimed to close the gap between in trying to understand what are the real production gains that we get from the simulation tools. There is a commonly used simulation tool that is used among the solar sector to run the energy calculations. It is called PVSYST. And of course, doing the energy calculations is paramount to estimate the energy production, and of course to ensure that we have, and using bankable tools for that, it ensures somehow bankability of the projects. So there is at the moment among the sector a lack of suitable tools that will allow to estimate thoroughly the energy production of the floating solar systems. And the main aspect is really connected with the fact how can we incorporate the potential benefit of this cooling effect of being close to the water. So that's what we aim to do with this publication, was to select 3 case studies and run this simulation tool by aiming to incorporate the cooling effects, and then also try to compare those results with what we call a reference system inland. So if we can move to the next slide. Yes,
Okay,
super.
just to jump again quickly, there's quite a few questions coming in, so I'll just rattle through this quickly if that's all right. So the first one is that, is there any concern about adverse effects of this technology on marine life?
That's a very good question, and like I said, a bit on the environmental side, there's a lot of studies going on. So it's still we still need to wait on that.
Okay, and then next one. So in designing fresh methods, I think that's meant to say, have you given any thoughts to include ESIB decommissioning in an offshore environment?
Can you repeat that question? Sorry, Jamie.
Yes, so it says in designing fresh methods, I think that's meant to say, I think there's maybe a bit of a typo there. Have you given any thoughts to include ease of decommissioning in offshore environments?
I think that decommissioning it's very important, and I'm pretty sure it's been taken upon the if it has to be been taken upon on the on this research projects and these pilots that have been done. So decommissioning is paramount. So we need to understand what we are going to do with the floats, with the PV modules once the floating solar farm reaches its end of life. So if you are concretely asking me if there is already established and thought methodologies on how to do the methodology, I think it's quite immature to say that, because the technology is still under development. So these things we'll see that as soon as we start to see a further increase and development in the applications.
Okay, great. And then the next one. So for marine environments, is conductive cooling, if conductive cooling isn't suitable, is heat exchange cooling being considered?
To my knowledge, I don't think so. But you can also expect to have some cooling. Conductive cooling will play a role for sure in the marine environments as well. I think that's we can have a different webinar on that, but it's we are going to have a technology in the marine environments. We are, and here the idea is that, let me see if I can put this in short words. So we have a technology in the middle of the ocean, and typically the temperature that the modules they are going to be facing, it's lower, because typically in the middle of the ocean we have more wind, and I think it's not fair that to say that conductive cooling will not play a role, because I think it will. But again, we have pilots ongoing, and they will be, you know, in the next upcoming years. I think that this question will be properly answered.
Okay, great. So then next one, there's two more quickly. Is a power source required for installations in the oceans, e.g. for solar tracking?
Oh, solar tracking in the ocean. To my knowledge, I haven't seen so far any, but again, I may be wrong, but I haven't seen any technologies for marine applications that are tracking the sun. We have some of them for freshwater applications, but not to my knowledge on marine ones. And to be honest, I think it's going to be a bit more challenging, because you have so many moving parts. And I think that the reliability of the system will be much more challenging.
Okay, and then last one quickly. So someone just saying, thank you for the presentation. What are the main environmental impacts of floating solar technologies, i.e. risk of pollution from materials used and marine disturbance?
Yes, okay. So I think it's in the end of the day, like I've been saying, and I don't want to sound repetitive, this and it is true. It's where the sector is. A lot of these issues are still being addressed, but there is a lot of focus in trying to develop technologies that they will have a low impact on these water bodies. For instance, one supplier of the technologies for freshwater applications, they have developed their technology in such a way that you can install their technology in drinking water reservoirs, so it doesn't have any impact on the quality of the water. So, but then with regards to the impact on the fauna, on the flora, since we are covering large areas of the water bodies, these things are still being addressed, and I think that it can be expected that there is going to be some impacts, but how big they will be and how it's still an unknown.
Okay, and then one more quickly one just come through. I'll just get onto this while we're doing questions quickly. So another question also related to offshore floating PV. Any impact to the fishing industry due to the scale required to achieve MW, which I assume means megawatts? There are already a number of industry union protests in Netherlands from the fishing industry.
Yes, that's a very fair question, and actually that I had that pinpointed, and probably I didn't mention as one of the main challenges for the technology. And I think it's in the end of the day, we have the fishing industry, the floating solar industry, the offshore wind industry, the oil and gas industry. You know, there's already knowledge, there's already knowledge that can be leveraged on how communication can be done between the different sectors without jeopardizing any of them. So I think it's also about putting in place policies, but also it's about ensuring that the different stakeholders communicate, and that we ensure that the different industries can operate safely in the same space.
Okay, I think that was the last one for just now.
Okay, super. So I think we are running a bit out of time, so I will run through the next couple of slides. Just here we have the three case studies. So we try to analyze quite different locations in terms of temperature and in terms of climate, of course. So we have a location in Spain, as a location in the UK, and a location in Brazil. So the rationale for choosing this location in Spain is because there's a lot of greenhouses in the vicinity, hence you will have the consumer close. And a bit the same for the location that was chosen for the UK. And the reason for choosing the location in Brazil is just simply because it's a well-known dam, and it was aiming to try to cover a bit the topic of potential co-locating this type of technologies. So if you have a quick look into the graphs, you can see that the global irradiation, which is the irradiation that is reaching the PV modules or the ground, it's very significantly throughout the year in the three different locations. And of course, in Brazil, it's way more stable than it is, for instance, in Spain, where we see the impact of the season. And last but not the least, in the location in Spain is where we saw the highest irradiation. Just the same thoughts or the same observation was seen in the ambient temperature at the three different locations. So if we go to the next slide, yeah, a bit on the technology and a bit on how to incorporate this cooling effect. So how we did that is that we tried to adapt the so-called U value in PVsyst, and our work was based in the research that was done until then in Singapore in a test bed where several different type of technologies they were tested, and they were actually grouped in different groups according to the increase in production that was seen, and hence on this U value. So if we have like technologies that they have a more minimized footprint on the water, that means that they have a better convective cooling. They are called the freestanding, and those type of technologies, they have a higher EU value. But then if we have technologies like, for instance, the type of HDPE, like we've seen in one of the previous slides, they have a larger footprint of water. So the water surface is partially blocked, so we have less impact of, for instance, the wind in creating this cooling effect, and hence these type of structures, they have a lower U value. So we then tried to study these two different type of technologies, a freestanding one and a large footprint one, to try to capture the largest differences in the U value. So if we move to the next slide, it's just a bit to pinpoint you with regards to the technology selection. I think it's the most important thing to show to you. It's on the floating technology itself. So we chose to use the ciel à terre type of technology. That's one supplier that has several different technologies that provides a certain inclination. And then we chose the other type of technology that is from Solaris Synergy, that they provide two types of inclination for the PV modules. And of course, there's limitations of application of these technologies with regards to wind and the wave heights. So that's, but that's again, I don't think I have time to be or jump into details into that. But if we go to the next one, it's a bit on the results. This may sound like a quite busy slide, but on the left hand side, you can see that different locations, they have different we call it tilt angles or optimum inclination for the PV panels to hasten more energy. And that's clearly depicted there. But I guess that the figure and the table in the middle, it's a bit more interesting, because there you can see the energy production from the two floating systems, but also from a inland reference system. And what we can see is that by using this PVC tool and by adapting the U value according to the type of structure that we are seeing, it is possible to see an increase in production for the floating technologies, but not as higher as has been anticipated in the past in the literature. So we are talking about something ranging, of course, depends on the technology, but for instance, for Solaris Synergy, we have something ranging around 2.5 increase in production in comparison to the reference system, and where we have anticipated, or it has been anticipated in the literature in the past, an increase in production of 10%. And of course, it's important to understand that the energy production, it's highly affected not by the type of technology, but also by the location where we are. So areas with higher irradiation, therefore we have higher production than in places with the lower irradiation, and of course that the PV losses due to temperature, they also kind of play an important role, because for instance, if we see that if we look at the location in Spain and Brazil, we have higher ambient temperatures, so the PV losses are higher than, for instance, in the UK, which is a much more moderate climate than we see in those two locations. So I think if we go to the next slide, it's just a reflection on potential LCOEs. I have this slide here just for you guys to have a quick look, but bear in mind that these values may be a bit out of dated, because the paper was published last year and the sector has been so the assumptions that were done for the LCOE, they are probably not up to date as we see the sector as per today, but nevertheless, we see a bit that the LCOE, of course, depends where we are in the world with our project, and that the LCOE, it's ranging a bit depending on the location, something in between 68 to 50 euros per megawatt hour. And as per today, we see LCOE of the technology around 53 euros per megawatt hour. So it's at least it's the results show some comfort in comparison to where we see that the technology. So if we go to the next slide, it's a bit on the conclusions, a bit to wrap up. Just to show to you guys that floating solar is here. It has a role in the energy transition. The technology type has or the technology, it is really expected that in comparison to ground mounted, we will see an increase in energy production, highly dependent on the technology that we are going to select. There should be a bit more focus on the sector to develop tools where we can incorporate a bit better the effect of the cooling effect. And I think that somehow and very quickly, I prove that these floating PV systems, they are somehow economically attractive solutions. So the last slide, because I still have one last slide, it is what is next. And I think that it has been pinpointed, and also you guys have asked questions about the marine applications of floating solar. So my colleague and myself, we have also written another paper that explores a bit more the marine applications of floating PV, the potential opportunities of even collocating marine floating PV with offshore wind, and also, of course, more details on the technology landscape, on the challenges with regards to the design, on the key technical aspects, and so on and so forth. So I think we are a bit over time, and that was a bit for today. I hope this has been a bit, has given you some insight in what is the floating solar market and what it consists and where we see it going in the future.